Sorry for the delay everyone, as I took an unscheduled week off from making videos for a number of reasons, but it's back to the usual stream of vids, and thus for today's Ancient DOS game, we're taking a look at a long-forgotten and possibly incomplete shareware title known as Dungeon Explorer. At first glance, this will seem like a very simple dungeon crawl. And that's essentially what this is. You buy equipment from stores, gain experience points and money through defeating enemies, and have an ultimate goal based on the module you're playing. Yet the shareware version of the game only comes with a single module to play, but the idea was instead of having to buy new games, you just buy additional modules, with each module being around 128 rooms large, save for the shareware module, which I believe tops out around 64 rooms. Now, had this project actually gone anywhere, it would have been an early example of a modular game system. However, I don't think it went anywhere. In fact, I don't even think the game was finished. And my logic here has to do with the state the game was released in. For one thing, the game's supposed to support both CGA and EGA graphics, but is missing one of the files needed to run properly in CGA mode, causing the game to crash the moment it tries to render any monsters. Which, yes, is contradictory to the fact that I actually have the CGA mode working properly, so I'll definitely be discussing how that's even possible later in the video. The other thing, though, is that when you beat the final boss of the module included with the shareware version of the game, that's it. No fanfare, no special messages, no lore, no story, no anything. Even if you make the trek all the way back to where you started the game, nothing else happens. So why am I covering this game then? Well, it's kind of for a similar reason as per what happened with Amulets and Armor many years ago. Well, I ended up covering the shareware version of that game because there weren't any legitimate downloads of the full version anywhere, yet it was a game I felt definitely needed to be resurrected due to its level of quality, and was hoping bringing attention to it would help make that possible. Now sure enough, regardless of if my video had an effect or not, Amulets and Armor Classic debuted not long following, essentially giving that game a second chance at life, but as the full experience. And that's what I'm hoping happens here, because for as simple and short as the shareware version of Dungeon Explorer is, it's fun. And I kind of want to see it get some kind of a resurrection going. Or even if it doesn't happen directly, it'd be interesting to see its gameplay format live on through other more modern titles and independent efforts. As we're going to see later in the video that the story of Dungeon Explorer doesn't have to end with Dungeon Explorer itself. Dungeon Explorer was developed over the course of 1990 by one John Murphy, and best I can tell was actually released right around the start of 1991, and is effectively a one-player dungeon crawl. Now it's supposed to support both CGA 320x200 4-color graphics and EGA 640x200 16-color graphics, but as previously noted, all downloads of this game are lacking one of the files necessary to run the CGA mode correctly. And as for audio, it only supports the PC speaker. As for its current release date, it's technically still shareware, but there's no way to register it, no full version copies exist anywhere online, and physical copies likely don't exist either, given all of that. This is a game which was nearly lost to time, but as we're going to see in a bit, even if the original author never comes back into the picture, it may be possible for this game to gain a new legacy from those who find it interesting. For the moment though, if you want a copy of the shareware version, most DOS gaming websites should suffice. So I'll go ahead and recommend the usual standby of the DOS Games website at www.dosgames.com. When you boot the game up, you're first presented with a screen asking you to select a module to play. This will then provide a story introduction for that module and ask you to either select an existing character to continue playing, or to create a new character simply by typing in a character name which hasn't been used yet. Well, in terms of the module that's been included with the game, you start off in a town of sorts inside a grassy canyon. And there's 6 different shops you can visit here, which from left to right are the Wand Shop, Potion Shop, Key Shop, Weaponsmith, Armorer, and Inn. With the exception of the inn, you can buy and sell respective items at each shop using the appropriate controls, as there's a help screen you can bring up which lists all of the pertinent controls, with the trade-in price of all items being half the cost to buy them. The inn works slightly differently in that you can't sell anything to it, seeing as that you're effectively just buying hit points, 1 hit point per piece of gold. This works out to be cheaper than using potions, seeing as how each potion costs 50 gold, but only restores 30 hit points. And there's no limit to how many hit points you can have, thus buying potions is effectively a worthless endeavor. You're definitely going to want to get some keys and wands though. Keys are 2 gold apiece and are used to open doors, not chests, as you're going to be finding tons of chests as you go along. Wands, on the other hand, reveal most trap tiles when used, or will inform you if no trap tiles are present in a particular room. As for weapons and armor, you're allowed to keep multiple different pieces at a time, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense for the armor, but makes perfect sense for the weapons, as some weapons can only be used for melee, while some are ranged and can thus be fired across multiple tiles distance. They're also all ordered from weakest to strongest for the most part, though the ranged weapons feel like they don't apply to this normal order. Unfortunately, the game hides the actual attack and defense values from you, so there's no real way to know how much better or worse all these pieces of equipment are. Perhaps something to tackle in a pro video in the future. Once you're equipped and ready to take on the rest of the world, you'll face your first encounter with some orc raiders. Now, the monster stats always show you how many hit points each monster has, their relative level, the number of them present, and the number of experience points each gives upon death. Though again, you don't ever get to see how many experience points you have, so it's always a mystery when you're going to level up or such. Made weirder by the fact that there's no upper health limit, so I don't actually know what leveling up does. Now, once you've had your first taste of combat is when you're going to notice 2 extremely pertinent things about the game. The first is that there can only ever be one kind of enemy in any room, which is a little weird, but also not really that consequential, given that apart from raw stats and appearances, there's not really any differences between all the different kinds of enemies. The only exception being that there are a tiny handful with ranged attacks. The other thing you're going to notice, though, is that even though you can only move and attack in 4 cardinal directions, enemies get 8 directional movement and attack. Suffice to say, you have to get a little clever about how to survive best, given that the AI for the enemies is very rudimentary, but you also can't just leave and come back later. If you only defeat some of the enemies in a room, and not all of them, the next time you visit, they will all be back and ready to fight. The only way to keep enemies from respawning is to defeat all of them, as this will stop respawns from happening, though every time you re-enter a room that you previously cleared out, there is a chance the monsters may come back anyways. And if you use the game's emergency exit feature at any time to return to the starting room, all monster rooms have their monsters respawned. When you kill an enemy though, they have a pretty good chance to drop a treasure chest, which will primarily contain gold, though also has a chance to contain a key, a wand, or a potion. You can also find chests out and about in the world, but quite often chests are placed in such a way that it's actually a net negative to try and collect them. The chests themselves don't give a lot of gold and only have a chance to have those other minor consumables. So oftentimes you'll see a bunch of chests, but with tons of enemies to face down or too many unavoidable traps in the way. In those events, it's just not worth going for them, seeing as you can never find equipment items or other unique things inside those chests. Now would be a good moment to mention some of your movement options. Because trap tiles can end up getting in the way, and because some passages are partially incomplete on purpose, you have the ability to jump, which allows you to move 2 spaces in a single turn. And not only can this be used to get away from enemies, but it can also be used to jump over trap tiles and gaps that you otherwise wouldn't be able to clear. You'll also be piloting a lot of ships as you go through, and every ship has cannons you can fire in place of your normal weapons. And cannons which are deadly accurate and do tons of damage, so generally speaking, when you're on a ship, you're pretty much unbeatable. And that about sums up all the gameplay, short of also being able to perform searches to get treasure from certain kinds of objects, similar to opening chests but with a chance to find nothing useful. And it's all very straightforward, but relatively fun for what it is. The only trick is that you may need to grind money at certain points, and if that ever happens, there are definitely good places to go for it, such as with this dangerous tomb found in the top left corner of the starting area. Normally when I talk about an old DOS game, there really isn't anything to say about what comes following because the game's already been out and done for a very long time, thus there's generally nothing more to follow suit. But for this game in particular, looking beyond where it was left is pertinent for a couple of reasons. Let's start with the less abstract one. This game was supposed to have CGA support, but every public download of it online is missing one of the files necessary to run it properly. It'll run, but as soon as the game tries to render an enemy of any kind, it crashes to DOS with an error code indicating a file is not found. The missing file is specifically the masking data for the CGA sprites, which was stored separate compared to the actual graphics. However, I'm not the first person who's shown an interest in bringing attention to this forgotten classic. A while back, another individual by the name of Michael Hitchens tried to do the same, and started building a website dedicated to diving into the game's inner workings. While he never got as far along with everything as he intended, he did find a way to reconstruct the missing sprite masking data for the CGA mode by converting the masking data for the EGA mode. And thus you can find the reconstructed file on his website at footballhead.github.io/explorer-utils, and going to the specific files section of that site. This section of the site also details the underlying file formats for those who want to try creating their own modules for this program. And yeah, that's the other reason why I wanted to bring this game up, is because creating modules for this from scratch shouldn't be all that difficult, given the simplicity of what's going on. Though admittedly, Michael hadn't yet decoded all of the game's internal data, so there's likely still a number of things which would need to be figured out to make a custom module for this program. That said, an alternative would be to just remake the entire thing in a modern game engine. Normally the prospect of trying to redesign a game in a modern engine is somewhat ridiculous and would take insane amounts of time. But this is so simple, an expert with nothing else getting in the way could doubtlessly have this entire thing converted over in a week. I even considered trying to do it myself for sake of this video, but I stopped short for a couple of reasons. The first is because I wouldn't want to make an exact copy. I'd rather make my own thing in the same style, but then that would involve designing all new assets and possibly even adding in some of my own desired mechanics to go along with the rest, and thus I quickly realized I wasn't the one to do it. But perhaps, for sake of a mod video in the future, I might give it a shot anyways. Haven't really decided if I want to or not. Overall, Dungeon Explorer is very simple and can be beaten relatively quickly. But for what little is here, it's still a fun time, and it's a shame that more modules for it, official or otherwise, have never surfaced. And I'm hoping one day the full experience will show up, or if it never does, that we see more content made for it from less official sources. But regardless, it was something I'd been holding back on covering on the show for a long time now, as I was always holding out hope that the full game would materialize someday. But that never happened, so here we are. Yep, just leave cycles set to auto and the game should run perfectly fine. Though keep in mind if you adjust the cycles count after starting the game, it can screw things up with the PC speaker sounds, so don't do that. Anywho, that'll be all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next up, 2 Saturdays from now on April 8th, will be another standard review, episode 311, where we're going to be taking a look at one of the very few games which has technically already shown up in an Ancient DOS Games video, but which I have not actually reviewed yet. Longtime fans of the show may have an idea or two of what game it could be, so be sure to stay tuned to see what I've got in store for everyone. Thanks for watching, everyone, and extra special thanks to everyone supporting me over on Patreon. If you'd also like to support the show directly and get some extra perks, then head on over to patreon.com/KASICK.